Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is John Van Lunen, and you are listening to Treasures of the Outer Banks, episode 26. In this episode, I talk to Barbara Miller, who works at the Frisco Native American Museum in Frisco, North Carolina, which is on Hatteras Island. And we talk about some of the things the museum is doing, how it was founded, and how they got a lot of their artifacts. Before I go any further, there's a book called A Historian's Coast, Adventures into the Tidewater Pass, written by David Soselsky. I've mentioned him before a few other times because he writes some great stories and books and does some great research on the Outer Banks and Inner Banks and the coastal low-lying areas of North Carolina. And in one of the chapters, he has an article called The Smoke and Ashes of Croatan, where he talks about a professor from East Carolina University, whose name is Dr. David Phelps. And according to Dr. David Phelps, who's done quite a bit of archaeology on Hatteras Island, at its peak, the tribe on Hatteras Island had about 5,000 people living there, which blows me away when you consider what a small area of land it is and that it's not the most productive in agriculture. But they did all this through a little bit of agriculture, a lot of fishing, and probably some kind of hunting for waterfowl and that type of thing. So very impressive that there was a culture down there that was so rich, which made me want to stop by the Frisco Native American Museum even more. So I was glad to sit down with Barbara Miller. Note that some of the bird sounds that you hear are not real birds. They're actually recording from the exhibits that we were sitting amongst. A correction I'd like to make is that I inadvertently called a David Soselsky book by the wrong name. It's actually called The Mariner's Song, a book I highly recommend. And finally, I'd like to mention that the museum would greatly appreciate any donations. It is an old building. It definitely needs some TLC. The artifacts are amazing. We should take care of this great resource, and we talk about how you can help out in the podcast, which we will start right about now. Barbara, tell me what you do here at the museum.
My official title is Director of Education and Public Relations, but we are a three-person operation. So it's myself, Amber Roth, and Joyce Bornfriend as our director. And so basically we're all chief cook and bottle washer, so we do whatever we have to. We make crafts. I work on getting information out. I'm sort of in charge of getting the stories out on Facebook. Amber does the website that we have, and then she does a lot of the electronic videos that you've seen. We give her ideas, she puts it together. She's a graphic person. I do a lot of work with posting on different native sites and etc., spreading our information as we can. We do some tours, but with the tour industry changing from COVID, we haven't really seen that a whole lot.
Right.
So,
So is there a board for this organization?
Yes, there is. It's a 5-member board, and we have, I think we rotate people out every so many years. That would definitely be a Miss Bornfriend question. We have a group of extraordinary volunteers, some of which have been with the museum for decades.
Wow.
And they come in and they help us build things. We do a yearly gathering where we work on projects the whole weekend. And we have a lot of people that come every year, but it's just the three of us, running around.
Right. And what's the overall objective of this
Officially,
museum?
we're a 501c3 educational organization.
Right.
And so it's about educating people about natives. Yes, we are still here. No, we are not all alike. And also talking about the tribes that were here, trying to get that information out. And we spend a lot of time answering questions when people are here in the museum about items and how they work. And certain questions pop up all the time. Interestingly enough, the beading. People look at the beads and how did they make those beads? And these are all trade beads that came, when the Europeans came, and more modern beads. But we actually have a display of what they used before, shells, and an elk tooth dress, for instance, was considered the height of wow on the plains. So women would have that. So you used everything.
Right. And it's amazing that it got all the way to here, right? Was that stuff located here, or was that?
Carl traveled all over.
Okay.
So he taught among 2 reservations. He was among the Hopi and among the Lenni Lenape or Delaware. And he was gifted things there, and he also, from a young child, always had this understanding that you hang on to things for the next generation. So whenever he got a hold of something, it was about protecting it, and that was kind of his main, we must protect this.
Yeah.
So a lot of this he gathered over the years.
So go ahead and introduce Carl to us real quickly.
The founder, the start of the museum was Carl Bornfriend. He came here, he had already been collecting things. He came here for a job and met Miss Joyce. When he came over the bridge, we have a lovely little bio of him. He took one look and said, "Oh, I have to live down here."
Yeah.
So even though he was working in Manio, he was living down here in Hatteras. Yeah. And he bought the house next door. Okay. And then this building became available. It was a gift shop, and he picked it up as well. And that's when he started the museum. Open only on weekends. Right? Built all the things by himself. He believed in recycling like no one else.
Right.
And started out with just one room, and then it was 2 rooms, and we've just built on and added things.
Excellent. So. And you gave me the quick walkthrough, and I might have to spend a couple more days here just to see everything, because there's a lot to absorb and a lot to see, and it's just fascinating. It's amazing. You guys have done an amazing job down here. Do you get many visitors that are also Native Americans popping in through?
We do. Over near where the bust of Carl is and our guest book, we have them sign, and we ask for their tribal affiliation, and every year we update a list that shows all the different tribes that have visited.
Wow.
So that list is not everybody who's represented here, but it's, sometimes we have those that are represented that are not on the list, but those are people who've actually walked in the door and said, yes, this is my nation. So,
very interesting. Do you see a nation, a common nation, keep popping up over and over again?
Well, most of the North Carolinas have been here. Okay. So we have a lot of Salagi or Cherokee. We see Hawasaponi, we see Lumbee, we see some Occaneechi-Saponi, we've seen some Kohari and Meherrin, and then we've had a lot of Virginia tribes. But then we've had tribes from Canada. Wow. And even, going into the South Americas come up and, identify wow. their tribes. So we get a lot of interesting people. Yeah.
I mean, your cool little museum in the middle of Frisco. And I was just driving, when you drive down I live in Southern Shores, and you drive down and, okay, there's Nag's Head, then there's the Tri-Village, and then you hit Avon, and things get a little, pokier, and then you get down here, it's like, oh, okay, this is Hatteras Island to me,
Well, this is how it was in the 70s and stuff when I grew up coming down here. My parents
hasn't changed much, yeah.
were coming down here before I came along. And I'll tell you, the first time I hadn't been here for about 5 years, and my mom died in 94, and so maybe longer than 5 years. And I came down here, and I was going through Kildale Hills going, what happened? That just blew my mind. Right. And then I got down here, and I was like, oh.
Oh, yeah. It hasn't reached here yet, which is good. No, I love it down here. I wish I could come down here more often. So have you had any association, or there's some archaeological digs going on nearby. Have they stopped by, or have you participated in any of these?
No, I'm not an archaeologist, but Miss Amber has spoken with, there was a group of digs working with the Cambridge Museum in England.
Okay.
And they came in and talked to her about a lot of things. There is also one run by a couple of local people, and we know of them, and we've spoken with some of the people, but we haven't actually been involved with any of the modern ones. Now, at one point in time, some of the items we have here were found by locals and donated to the museum, things that they found wow. on the island in their property.
Very cool.
And the room where the moose is was originally where that was, but now it has its own room here. And then we have some pieces that came from some of the ECU with David Phelps.
Oh, yeah.
And we've, of course, read those reports and that kind of thing. So
I'm sorry, did he donate a few of his finds to you? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we have a couple of, I believe, pots that were from him.
Okay.
Or what's left of pots from him.
Right.
but primarily it's been, and then of course the canoe was actually found on the property by Carl.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was.
So you told me when I walked in, go ahead and say it again, what he found.
It was after one of the hurricanes, and I don't remember which one, but we're talking a considerable time ago, that he found washed up the remnants of a canoe. Now, he looked at it and knew it was important, so he tucked it away because that was Carl.
Yeah.
And then they had a flood at Lake Phelps, which brought up a lot of these canoe pieces, parts, and whole canoes.
Right.
Again, cypress canoes from the bottom. And he went, oh my God, because there was a big article on the paper. So the gentleman who worked with the people at Lake Phelps, I'd have to look up his name, actually has been and seen what our remnants of the canoe are. And he said, oh, that's definitely one of these canoes. So
wow.
we haven't had it carbon dated, haven't won the lottery, so it's kind of expensive. They recently found in Lake Mattamuskeet, over 900-year-old
wow.
remnant. They found several canoes down in Louisiana and Georgia areas. Up in Canada, also these big cypress-heavy canoes. They have carbon dated some of the ones in Canada at over 1,500 years. And some of these run 24 to longer feet long. They're
That's
just
amazing.
huge.
Yeah.
So.
Which means they were probably using them to travel some great distances if you were, making them that big.
Well, and also for rough seas or rough lakes.
Yep.
Like obviously the Great Lakes are not common for,
right.
But for instance, if you get into some of the eastern areas where they have a lot of birch bark, they made canoes out of that. A, it was available. B, it was light, and they have lots of little streams. So suddenly they run out of water. You grab this thing, run over the top hill, and plop it in the water over there.
Right.
You can't do that with one of these. There's no, short of a team of 10.
Need a little manpower to do it. Yeah. That's very interesting. So, just to let everybody know, there's a lot of different tribes represented, and it's all been based upon just the gifting, if they've had enough to make a display or what have you. But there's a lot of local stuff that's been found. Do you have, if you could say, what percentage of this museum is local finds, historical finds, and maybe give some of the highlights? Obviously, that canoe is a huge highlight in my book, but could you mention some of the other local stuff that may have been found and gifted to you?
We have some shell remains from midden piles. Now, a midden pile is a trash heap, so that's where they kept them, threw them when they were through. They obviously ate a lot of shellfish.
Yeah.
And we have some of those. We have pottery remains. The clay here is not the best, so they would mix in ground up shell.
Right.
It adds lime and calcium, so it reduces the acidity of the clay and it makes it more workable. Plus, it acts as grog to move heat through so it doesn't kaboom on you. Mm. And so those are probably our best in our canoe. A lot of things would not have survived. Gourds wouldn't have survived. Moccasins would have deteriorated, especially with the acidity of our ground.
And you said arrowheads have been found around here?
Yes. The thing is that there were huge trade routes throughout all of the Americas.
Right.
So we don't have great rocks here for making arrowheads,
right.
in case, people have seen that. But what has been found just in last year, someone stepped on an arrowhead in the ocean here, down here on Hatteras Island, and it was black and it had been tumbled. So you can see where it had been sort of worn down by the ocean.
Yep.
But it was chert. Now, we don't have chert anywhere around here. You're talking Tennessee, West Virginia, Kentucky, these areas. And the trade routes were bringing them in. And, of course, we were sending shells and stuff out. And probably feathers as well, because those were big.
Right.
So we have these things that pop up. Now, we have a whole collection of points, some of which were donated from James River in Virginia.
Okay.
And they're marked. We've got chert in there. We've got flint. So there's a lot of different things. There's some quartzite, which would have probably been in the Virginia areas and stuff.
Right.
So
you bring up a good point. There are pretty much no rocks on the Outer Banks, natural occurring rocks. So, but being on waterways, it was a natural, transport for a lot of things. North and south. Maybe not so much east and west, but definitely north and south.
Well, and they used bone and shells as well.
True.
The idea that you take a life, you have to use everything. So you can do a pretty good job of, say, cleaning a hide by using a shell edge.
Right.
And then the bones could be made needles, fish hooks, They used scraping tools. As it broke and shattered, you just simply made a different, smaller tool. Another reason we don't find a lot of that.
Right.
So,
There's a guy named Dave, and I hope I say his name right, Ciselski. He wrote the book I mentioned before, the Mariner Song, but he also wrote some books on what was going on around here. And the researchers he talked to estimated that the population was about 5,000 people.
yeah, 4,000 or 5,000 was what Phelps said.
That's just amazing.
Based on the midden piles, look how much it is over the time, how much people would have eaten. The midden piles, you have obviously lots of shellfish. We have rabbits down here. We have, deer. We have mini deer. We call them mini deer because they're tiny.
Yeah.
We have various birds. Of course, obviously you've got geese. In the winter you see all the snow geese and everything. And pretty much if it didn't move fast enough, it got et.
Right.
So.
And do you think so? And we mentioned this earlier that they were helpful to the first Europeans that kind of showed up. And do you think they helped them find food and catch their own food and help their diet out a little bit when they were locating here?
I'm sure they did. The best thing you can read, and it will drive you a little nuts because it's written in Old English, but is a brief entry report of the Newfound Land of Virginia, published in 1590. So it was of the John White expeditions. There are woodcuts of many of his images, and you'll see them actually in the videos we have here in this section. And they talk about the different plants that they were excited to see and the plants that they explained. They talked about various animals they could eat. They were very convinced you couldn't eat a raccoon and things like this.
Right.
Some of the printing techniques are a little odd, so you just kind of go through the sentence and think, well, that's probably what they meant.
Right.
Go back again. But it gives you a lot of information, including old maps, because this island here on Hatteras, this part with Frisco and Buxton and everything, was 6 miles wide at one point until storm damages and general shifting happened. So there's probably a lot of stuff out to the water that's either been worn down or destroyed or just simply there. And to our knowledge, and this may be knowledge that wasn't shared, obviously, for certain reasons, they have not found burial sites here of natives. So,
right. Well, what does that mean to you?
That they're probably out to sea or the sound.
They got washed away.
Yeah. Now, up north in Craddock, they did find a couple of sort of like communal burial areas where they had apparently sort of like a graveyard, except for they kept opening up the same place and putting people, as far as I remember what I read. Okay. But basically, they were like a communal spot. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think they migrated at all?
Not really. You have, we live here year round. We can survive from the ocean and there's lots of plants and this kind of thing. For instance, cattails. Everybody snorts at cattails, but they made mats out of them for their housing. You can eat 3 parts of a cattail. You can eat the root. You can eat the top part when it's green. And then you can eat about a foot or so of the bottom if you peel the outside. So you've got a very versatile food source there. You have yopon tea, which was also used as a medicine as well as a drink, depending on how it was prepared. And birds, we're here in the winter where we have huge bird populations. Yeah. So there's nothing to go and harvest those birds. But I think that they showed them fresh water obviously would have been hard to learn to find. And then various medicines, because they do talk about that, a list of plants in that book about what they were exposed to. The English were very interested in the pine trees because they used a mixture of turpentine and pine sap to make a paint for their boats to keep them waterproof.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why they were black. And we have examples of 2 eel pots here that were from probably the Virginia area. And this area, they would have caught eels and eaten them. It's not something that's common now, but...
Right.
So...
But they did what they had to do. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, can you talk about some of the words and names that the Native Americans, that we still use from the Native Americans that were here? I guess like, Yopon, Kinnikit, stuff like that.
Yopon, yes. Kinnikit, I'm not so sure about. the tribes up and down the Outer Banks, so from Roanoke Island down to here, spoke an Algonquian language. We don't see any instances of them fighting amongst each other. There's no records of warfare. So they were most likely related tribes. There are a lot of tribes out there that had cousin tribes. You call the Sioux, which is actually a French word, but then you get the Lakota and the Nakota, the Dakota, the whole group. They have multiple council fires. So we feel that they were probably one entire nation, and they were different villages with their own chiefs and that kind of thing, which was fairly common. There is right now a little bit of conflict going on in Ocracoke because, according to what the English wrote, they were Algonquian speakers called the Wakakan. And now there's some claims by Tuscaroras that they may have been related to them, which they were actually an Iroquoian speaker. So there's a little bit of difference there. Yeah. We know that, so we had the Croatoan here. Mm-hmm. You had the Pakawak in Avon, and you had the Hattarask up in the Tri-Villages area. So the name there comes from their language. It's an Algonquian language, so you might be able to catch some words in Algonquian that would lead you to that. I've heard several different things about Kinnikites, so that's why I have a question mark there.
Okay.
So.
All right. Do you think there's still some DNA on the eastern half of North Carolina from the tribes that were here?
I'm not a DNA scientist, but I know that there are people here who have families that can trace back.
Is that right?
To the various tribes. We had a couple of volunteers who traced back to Hattarask. We have a gentleman now who's written a book, Gray Parsons, who's written a book about his heritage, which was a mixture of, he sort of fictionalized his family research, but he has Native, he has African, and he has Scottish, which came from a cabin boy, indentured servant type thing. Right. So we know that there are people who have their heritage, but in the early 1700s, the tribes here were pretty much gone. So that information was lost. I believe at one point they were forced inland, or some of them were forced inland, because there was talk about something with Chowan and that area. I don't know if that actually happened. Right. The records back then were...
Yeah. And what I found in researching not Native, but the African American slaves is they didn't always want to keep good records, if you know what I mean, because they didn't want to be indicted on something. So probably the same thing with the Native Americans.
Well, you also run into... So my mom and I have done a lot of research about our tribal history. If you go back to my great-great-grandfather, okay, he went in a lot of records by Thomas Miller. Before that, he was the son of Meshuggah, who was a chief in Indiana who refused to go to Oklahoma. So they said, well, you guys are not recognized anymore. You're not Native anymore. So it's just the guys who go to Oklahoma, you're going to be recognized. But I have found his traditional name, which I believe was pronounced Matosinye, spelled about 7 different ways. Yeah. So think about, so you've got someone who's maybe not the most literate person trying to spell these names from languages that a lot of native languages don't have certain sounds in them at all. Right. So you're trying to do this. So that's probably happened. So you get, if I didn't know who Meshuggah was, I would have never known who my great-great-grandfather was because of that.
Yep. Some of my notes, it says between 1711 and 1713, the Algonquian chiefdoms were pretty much destroyed or subjugated, which tells me that, they probably, the Europeans being opportunistic said, well, here's another chance to have another slave or something like that. So
and the tribes certain tribes made allies, and it helped them grow in power. So they were able to take other tribes, and either take their property. There was also not so much a stigma of intermarriage, especially within related groups. That didn't really, nobody went. So there would have been a little, and there was a lot of mingling, obviously, with European. So
right. How do you see the museum transitioning in the future?
Well, we would love to expand. Again, that comes down to a fund issue, since we are entirely privately funded. Mm-hmm. What the other thing we are doing now, you're already seeing parts of it, is we're adding electronic. So we've got this story here. We've got several videos scattered throughout. It's a way to utilize our space, expand the information you're getting without necessarily building a whole new building.
Right.
We would love to keep that up and work toward bringing in more people during the summer to talk to people. We have various groups that we can reach out to come in and do demonstrations, but where do we put them? The funds to bring them here and that kind of thing. So it makes it difficult.
Speaking of which, how are visitation numbers looking? I know we're just coming out of a pandemic. I mean, how do they look?
Weird.
Okay.
So we tend to be judging everything by 2019, which was our last normal year before the pandemic. Right. We were closed for 14 months. So now 2021, it was like, in a certain sense, crazy.
Yeah.
Everybody was like so desperate to get out that we were pretty high visitation. And people were also in the gift store pretty much, look, it moved, buy it. So this year was a little bit different. It was a little bit more reserved. Also, It started out with gas prices and everything being so crazy that changed what was happening. We were seeing down here, and a lot of talk about rental rates and everything. But it's been, it hasn't been a huge drop or a huge spike. So it's been reasonably consistent. We're a little off this year, but again, I think that comes down to everybody trying to save pennies.
Right. And a little normalization probably after.
Yeah, 2021 is an aberration year, so we just don't even count it.
Yeah, I was in the water sports business that summer, and it was an anomaly. So I understand. And so if let's say somebody wanted to make a donation to help your organization, who would they make a check out to?
Frisco Native American Museum.
Excellent.
We have also an arrangement with the Outer Banks Community Foundation. We have a special fund there that you can give directly to. Certainly, we spent a lot of money putting in a whole new roof this year. Well, a 2/3 roof because the building was added on. So that part has a very strange fabric roof.
Okay.
So that still needs to be replaced. We need some new electronics in the sense of our
displays and stuff.
Well, no, where you plug everything into
the outlets and everything. Your fuse box.
Thank you, fuse box.
We'll get there.
Oh, not enough coffee and stuff. And then we are trying to expand programs. We used to do a powwow here.
I was going to say, I recall that. What happened to that?
Carl ran into some issues with his health where he was in and out of the hospital for 2 years.
Gotcha.
We also found that while we had tremendous support from the Outer Banks Visitors Bureau, they helped us with grants for advertising, this kind of thing. We had a lot of trouble with people finding places down here to stay. So it became difficult for the drum groups and et cetera. And, we are kind of out.
Yeah.
So it made it a little bit harder to get, a lot of dancers and that kind of thing. And when he was gone for 2 years, again, volunteers. We had volunteers coming in running all of the, except for the few vendors that came in. So without them, that made it difficult.
I seem to, I think I read about a powwow in Plymouth or something, or Edenton maybe. Have you heard of this one?
No, but I highly recommend powwows.com.
Okay.
They're a free site. You just put the state in and go to the month you're interested in. It'll tell you if there's one.
Okay.
There is one in Raleigh, usually in February or March. It's with the science school. That's well attended. Okay. And I know that all the tribes around here, the Meherrin, the Hawasaponi, I believe the Kahari do their own. The Cherokee obviously has at least one. The Lumbee have 2 a year, spring and fall, I believe. So it's all there.
Okay, excellent. And when is the museum open?
During the summer, so starting a week before Easter, which should be around April 2nd or 3rd, somewhere in there. Yeah. We're going to be open Tuesday through Sunday, 10:30 to 5. Right now, we are only open Saturday and Sunday, 10:30 to 5.
Right now.
Yep. So up until that time. So we always use this time to do cleaning and fixing, and in my case, painting right now.
Yeah.
So.
By the way, it's mid-January here right now. So how long is your winter? When do you go to winter hours?
January 1st, always.
January 1st, okay.
Through whenever, like I said, a week before Easter, so it depends on when Easter is each year.
Yep, understood. And I'm sorry, when were the hours?
10:30 to 5, every day but Monday.
Got it.
During the summer.
Excellent. Anything else you want to promote or talk about?
During the summer we do classes Friday. They're usually aimed at kids and families, so we alternate every other Friday. And Miss Amber does feather painting. I can show you some of her feathers. And I'm going to be doing some simple beaded necklaces with people this year.
Nice.
And then in the winter, we do some pretty strong workshops. So Amber does pine needle basket making. She does dream catchers. And then I do cooking classes. Now, we released our first cookbook 2 years ago now. And so we alternate. Again, this is on Saturdays because these are 2 to 4 hour classes. They're not the quickie 1 hour that we do in the summer. And we do cooking. So we've done things like Indian pudding. We've done elk stew. All these different things, various fry breads and other breads. Cherokee bean bread is very popular. Sort of, you do it like a tamale, but it's with beans and corn. So, and then working to get more people in as speakers and that kind of thing. So.
Right. Is there a good day in the summer to visit? I know I've lived here 24 years. I know there's some days that are just crazy, stay off the roads. but is there a day that might be less crowded?
When it rains, it's bananas.
Yep. So be careful when it rains.
Yes. And, Saturday and Sundays are often, because of their changeover days, they're a little bit lighter. We do notice that Wednesdays and Thursdays tend to be kind of bananas.
Right. Makes sense.
Well, yeah, people come in and they get nicely sunburned and then they need to retreat.
Yep.
So.
I know those people well.
Yes.
24 years in the water sports business. I know it well.
Yes.
So I can relate to that. Okay. So either early or late in the week and maybe in the off season if
Oh, yeah, we get wonderful crews in here. Starting, about mid-September, we get a lot of seniors in and we do have a special senior rate. We get homeschoolers and that kind of thing, which can be fun. We have done school tours, obviously, that kind of got drowned down by the COVID. Yeah. And we do have to make arrangements for those, but we work on those.
Do you have a Facebook page?
We do. Our Facebook page is almost 5,000 followers now.
What's it called?
Frisco Native American Museum.
Yep.
Or you can use our initials, FNAM, and it'll pop up.
Okay. And what's your website?
NativeAmericanMuseum.org.
Excellent.
And we do a Museum Mondays post, Miss Amber does. It usually comes out Tuesday morning, but it's usually talking about either something going on in the museum or a particular item, like we did Seminole dolls this week. So, information about it so that when you come and see them, you've got this extra info.
Gotcha. So I just thought of one last question. What's the most exciting part for you working here at the museum?
Well, I'm an artist, so I love creating things, and so it's really nice to teach and share that with people.
Right.
But it's also really nice to part of our 2/3 of our organization is about educating people about natives.
Right.
So we like to talk about the things that aren't commonly known, like people know the Code Talkers of World War II. Very few people know about there were World War I Code Talkers that started this whole thing. So we like to talk about things like that. We talk about the quill work, which the idea that if you took a life, you had to use everything. We're working on an exhibit that we don't know whether it's going to be a static or whether we're going to be doing, again, electronic. That's a wonderful diagram of a buffalo and all the different parts and how they were used.
Yeah.
So that you can see that. Things like that. It's just interacting with the public is always exciting.
Right. And you're obviously an educator just by your nature, I can tell.
I grew up with my father, who was Italian and became a citizen. He spoke 3 or 4 languages pretty well and bits and pieces of German.
Nice.
My mom was the wild card. She was a native, and at one point she was in the roller derby. And
episode number 2.
Yeah, she was a character. So, but she was always very proud of her heritage. And one of the things I noticed personally growing up in the East Coast in Alexandria, Virginia, was that people had this attitude that natives lived in the past or only on reservations.
Right.
I had a high school teacher say real Indians don't exist anymore in class, and yeah. So that's affected me.
That'll motivate you.
Just a little.
Well, The name of the show is Treasures of the Outer Banks. You're definitely a treasure. What you guys are doing here is just amazing. I wish you the best of luck, and I recommend anybody who's on the Outer Banks heading down to Hatteras Island, stop by in Frisco. It's right next to the highway, Frisco Native American Museum. Barbara, thanks for your time.
Oh, no way. You're welcome.
I appreciate Barbara Miller sitting down and talking with me. After talking to her, it makes me realize how little I actually know about Native Americans. They're all so different. They all have different customs and cultures, and they all come from different terrains, geographies, different languages. It's almost a little overwhelming as to how much information is missing. So I appreciate her taking the time and talking to me and at least filling me in on a little part of the country that I didn't know a whole lot about. So I hope you enjoyed it as well. Feel free to stop by the website, treasuresoftheouterbanks.com, and see what we have going on. Sign up for the emails. Happy to send stuff out to you. I usually send something out with the latest podcast, and I also send something out every Friday with what's going on the Outer Banks. So check it out, sign up, and we hope to see you next time. Have a good one.